I never thought I'd be in this situation, staring into the camera, my hands shaking, my heart racing, knowing that what I was about to do would change everything. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. It started as just another weekend at my uncle's house, a place that always felt a little strange, but never dangerous. But that day, something was different. His voice had an edge to it, something I couldn't quite place, and when he told me to grab the camera, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Our dog, Max, was sitting in the corner, his tail wagging like he always did when he saw me. He trusted me. I had grown up with him, played with him, fed him scraps under the table when no one was looking. He wasn't just a pet, he was family. But my uncle, he had this way of making things feel off. He'd always had weird ideas, but this time I could tell he was serious. I tried to laugh it off, to pretend like I didn't hear him right. "What do you mean?" I asked, hoping he was joking. But he wasn't. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I felt like I didn't really know him. "Just press record," he said, his voice calm but firm. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the button. Max tilted his head, looking between us, sensing something was wrong. I wanted to say no. I wanted to walk away. But there was something about the way my uncle looked at me, like I didn't have a choice. Like if I didn't do this, things would get worse. My chest tightened as I pressed record, my breath caught in my throat. And then my uncle told me what to do next. I wish I had said no. I wish I had run. But I didn't. And what happened next? I still can't believe it actually happened. I held the camera up, my hands clammy against the plastic. The little red light blinked, signaling that we were recording. My uncle stood there, watching me closely, his expression unreadable. Max shifted on his paws, still wagging his tail, but now a little slower, like he wasn't sure if this was supposed to be fun or not. I swallowed hard, waiting for my uncle's next words, hoping, praying that this was all some kind of weird joke. But it wasn't. "Go on," he said, nodding toward Max. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something that made my skin crawl. I forced myself to breathe, trying to think, trying to understand why he wanted this on camera. Why was this so important to him? I glanced around the room, looking for a way out, some excuse, some reason to make this stop. But the way my uncle stood blocking the door made it clear. I wasn't leaving until he got what he wanted. Memories started flashing in my mind. When I was younger, I used to love visiting him. He was the fun uncle, the one who always had cool stories, who let me stay up late watching movies Mom never approved of. But as I got older, things started to change. His jokes weren't as funny anymore. The way he watched me sometimes made me uncomfortable, even if I couldn't explain why. And now, standing here, camera in my hands, I realized I should have trusted those feelings a long time ago. Max whined softly, breaking me from my thoughts. He was waiting for me. My uncle was waiting for me. And in that moment, I knew, whatever happened next, I wouldn't forget it. I kept my grip tight on the camera, my fingers pressing into the sides like it was the only thing keeping me steady. My uncle took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "What's the problem?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost patient, but there was something in it that made my stomach twist. Max's ears perked up, his tail lowering just a little. He wasn't excited anymore. He knew something was off. I wanted to drop the camera, to tell my uncle I wasn't doing this, but I didn't know how he would react. I had seen him get angry before, not the kind of anger that explodes, loud and obvious. No, my uncle's anger was different. It was quiet, slow, like a rope tightening around you without you noticing, until it was too late. I took a breath, trying to buy time. "Why do you need this recorded?" I asked. My voice sounded small, weak. My uncle smirked, tilting his head like I had just asked the dumbest question in the world. "You'll understand later," he said. But I didn't want to understand. I just wanted to get out of there, and I was starting to realize I might not be able to. My uncle's eyes stayed on me, waiting. The air in the room felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. Max let out another small whimper, his body shifting nervously. He could sense it too, the feeling that something was about to happen, something we couldn't stop. I swallowed hard, my fingers trembling as they hovered over the camera. Every second that passed felt stretched, dragging me deeper into something I didn't understand. My mind raced, searching for a way out, a way to stall. But my uncle wasn't the type to let things slide. He took another step forward, his voice lower this time. "You're wasting time," he muttered. His tone wasn't angry, but it didn't have to be. It was a warning. My pulse pounded in my ears as I forced myself to look up at him. His face was unreadable, his expression calm, too calm. That was the scariest part. Then, without warning, he reached out and grabbed my wrist. Not hard, not enough to hurt, but enough to make it clear. I wasn't getting out of this. I had to make a choice, and I had to make it now. My uncle's grip tightened just slightly, his fingers pressing into my wrist like he was testing how much resistance I'd give. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to yank my arm away, to shove the camera into his hands and tell him to do whatever weird thing he wanted to do himself. But I didn't. I couldn't. His eyes told me that wasn't an option. Max let out a low whine, shifting on his paws. My uncle glanced at him, then back at me, his expression unreadable. And then, just as suddenly as he had grabbed me, he let go. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll do it myself." He snatched the camera from my hands before I could react. My stomach twisted as he pointed it at Max, his finger hovering over the record button. That should have been a relief, should have made it easier now that I wasn't the one holding it. But it didn't. It only made things worse. Because in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about me filming. It never was. It was about what was on camera. And whatever my uncle was about to do, he didn't need me for it. That's when I knew. I had to stop him. My heart pounded as my uncle lifted the camera, his finger pressing down on the record button. Max took a cautious step back, his ears flattening. I didn't know what my uncle was planning, but I knew one thing. I couldn't let it happen. Without thinking, I lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice shaking. He turned to me, his face calm but his eyes dark, unreadable. For a second, I thought he'd push me away, maybe even get angry. But he just stared at me, like he was waiting to see what I'd do next. Max let out a sudden bark, startling us both. In that moment of distraction, I snatched the camera from my uncle's hands. My fingers fumbled as I hit the power button, shutting it off. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking, but I held my ground. My uncle sighed, shaking his head. "You really don't get it, do you?" he muttered. Then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled. Not an angry smile, not a forced one, a knowing smile. And that's when I saw it. Behind him, on the shelf, another camera, a red light blinking. It had been recording the whole time. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The red light blinked steadily, mocking me. My uncle knew. He had planned for this. While I had been so focused on stopping him, he had already set up another way to get what he wanted. Slowly, he turned to look at the hidden camera, his smile never fading. "You really thought you could stop this?" he said, his voice almost amused. I felt sick. My hands clenched around the camera I had grabbed, but it didn't matter anymore. The real footage wasn't in my hands. Max whimpered, shifting closer to me, his warm fur pressing against my leg. I needed to think. I needed to do something. And then, suddenly, I did. Without hesitating, I reached for the shelf, knocking the hidden camera down with a sharp clatter. My uncle's face darkened for the first time, his body tensing as he stepped toward me. But I didn't wait. I grabbed Max's collar and bolted for the door. My heart pounded as I ran, shoving the door open and sprinting outside, Max right beside me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. Whatever my uncle had planned, I wasn't going to be a part of it. As I reached the street gasping for air, I knew one thing for sure. I would never go back there again.